What's up, Penn State fans? That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. It's a Wednesday edition of the BWI Live Show from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. 60 minutes or so of Penn State football talk coming your way on the final Wednesday of May. T. Frank, it is a day before we get some kick time news for the 2025 season, which I'm really excited about. It's not as exciting across the internet, it appears, as it is for me. But exciting news there. We have some news and notes to get to, and then some variety of buy and sell topics, including one focused on who Penn State's leading tackler could be this year. We're going to get into your Keystone players, the ones that Penn State cannot afford to lose on defense. And then we want you to participate with us. Join the chat now if you're on the YouTube channel. The live chat is rolling. Thank you for those of you that are already here. But we'll finish with a mailbag. So we have some questions already in. We're happy to answer yours as well. T. Frank, how are we doing on a Wednesday morning in late May?
It's one of those times of the year when you start out the day going, I don't know what we're going to talk about. And then your brain engages that part of the, hey, let's just have a conversation about Penn State football. And suddenly it's like, okay, we got a lot to talk about today. I think we've got some interesting topics that both we've created and you know, from people on social media. I haven't done this in a long time where we open up the mailbag to Twitter. So got some fresh perspective today that I'm excited for, and we're going to get into that at the end of the show. But of course, best way to do that, best way to is to subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com to get on the weekly mailbag. I didn't do one this week specifically, so I did borrow some questions from other parts of the site. Great place for you to go and ask your questions, though, because they're all over, and we end up answering a lot of them here or, you know, in the different threads over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.
All right, let's get into the news and notes of the day. The EA Sports College Football 26 cover release took place on a Tuesday. EA Sports going to release the second version of its newly recreated, I guess you could say, video game this year, featuring college coaches, real-life coaches. We're not in the game in 2025 when it made its long-awaited return. They are this year. So James Franklin, Nick Singleton are a part of the deluxe edition cover. There was a main cover featuring two players, one from Ohio State, one from Alabama, and then there was the big cover that had guys from and coaches from all over the place. So not going to spend a ton of time on that because I just don't have a lot of thoughts on it, T. Frank, but
I got one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So a lot of my job ends up in Photoshop, working to make the stuff you see on the show. I'm not the best in the world, but even I'm like, this really looks like they just did a bunch, like they copied and pasted faces in here. I don't want to say I could have done this, but I'm surprised at the lack of polish here. It looks like they're like, oh no, we need to have a second cover photo. So they just copied a bunch of cutouts and put them in Photoshop and then sent that out to Twitter. I got to imagine the deluxe edition is going to have a little bit more polish than this, because this is fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. So if you remember back in March, there was a leaked version of this cover, T. Frank, and it is not the leaked version and the final version are not the same. I assume that was intentional because I would imagine the leaked one was the actual cover and they did not want to give in to the leakers. So instead, they just decided to make whatever this grab bag was. Yeah, I thought the same thing. I looked at it and thought, that looks like what the 2012 version of EA Sports College Football might have looked like. It's not how the 2025 one should look.
Listen, if you're going to be doing college football, and you're going to be doing college football 26, and you're going to have just random cutouts of everything, how do you not have the Washington State flag on there? Like, that's a college, like, if you're talking about traditions in college football, you're talking about, like, playing to the fans' love, and, like, that was part of it, electric traditions. The fact that they got Reggie Bush and Tim Tebow on there, like, as alum, but they don't have anything for game day specific, that seems like an oversight because this was thrown together by interns.
Yes, it did absolutely look that way. T. Frank, are we sounding better? I apologize if the mic was a little bit low there to start to our listeners. Good. All right. Little technical difficulties. It's been one of those Wednesdays. The behind-the-scenes version of the prep for this show was not necessarily the plan, but we're going to get through it, and we appreciate you being here with us either live or on replay. T. Frank, are you excited for kick times on Thursday? Because I'm excited for kick times on Thursday.
Yes, I will be excited for you. I'm always excited when there's something to talk about. The problem is I'm so bad with dates and times and things like that it just I know the week of who they're playing and when they're playing. That's usually when I check in because I just know every single week in the fall, Penn State football, full stop. That's all I've got.
Right.
And so like when it comes to the game times and things like that, that matters for fans and for people that want to tailgate and go to the game and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like I do, I'm trying to get better at this, I guess is the thing I'm trying to say. Be more like Greg.
I get excited about it because while our YouTube and podcast audiences typically do not fill the chat section with questions about when games will start, we get it in a lot of other places via various forms of social media, over on the Lions Den message board, and starting to answer the puzzle that is the 2025 kickoff time schedule reveal is always an exciting day for me. So we're going to get at minimum the first 3 kick times tomorrow. That will be all the games of Penn State's very exciting, I should say, not exciting, non-conference schedule that starts with Nevada and features FIU and Villanova. Scott Docterman over at The Athletic made his annual predictions, and I thought he did a very nice job setting up his predictions in the sense of, and if you follow over Blue White Illustrated, easy for me to say this morning, subscribers can follow some more in-depth thoughts on this over on the Lions Den message board. But the way that TV predictions work is that if you get one wrong, you're going to get probably almost all of them wrong. It's not like a mock draft where you can kind of, you might lose a couple picks, but for the most part, you're going to be okay.
Because one affects the other so significantly?
Correct. Yes. And so we'll see how his predictions end up working out. But right now, he is predicting Nevada 3:30 p.m., FIU at noon, and he does not have a pick for Villanova yet. But I think that's probably about right. I think at minimum you can expect one of those non-conference games to be at noon, one of them to be at 3:30, and then the other one is going to be either noon or 3:30. I don't think you're going to get a night game in the non-conference slate. We'll see. I mean, that week 1 with Nevada, I guess, is a possibility for a potential night game. I can't see it in week 2. I certainly cannot see it against Villanova in week 3. So time will tell. And then, I'll just get right to the point, T. Frank, because that's going to be the next question everybody asks. Brian says, I just want to know the week 5 kick time. Yes. So college football, its conferences, its television partners have the option of announcing quote-unquote special game times tomorrow as well. Will they? We'll have to wait and see. If you go back to this process from the last 2 years, they did not announce quote-unquote special game times involving Penn State, which I think we can all, let's not beat around the bush. The whiteout game is what you're all waiting for.
Yeah.
In addition to a Penn State-Ohio State kick time, which, of course, that game is not until November. So could we get those answers tomorrow? Yes. Will we? I would set your expectations pretty low for that. But maybe. We'll see, T. Frank.
Yeah. Do you ever think we'll get out of this scheduling 10 days out because the more professionalized this becomes and the more that TV has to say, like, they must like the flexibility, but, I'm just going off straight copy and paste NFL model. The kickoff times for all of the games before the season starts, and then they have the ability to flex those games if they want. This just seems like a very haphazard and dumb way to do things. Like, this is dumb. Why are you making fans? Why are you holding them hostage until the final 10 days before a game?
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating, in my opinion. And I think there has to be some way to maybe blend what the NFL does, which is give you everything for the most part up front, and what college football does, which gives itself flexibility for the surprise teams. Like Indiana, I think last year is a perfect example. Like if you were setting up the schedule in a NFL style way last year, you would have stuck Indiana in as many inadvantageous, I guess you would say, windows as possible. And then certainly their games became a lot more important down the stretch. So I get it from that perspective. But the whole window deal, as long as there's 3 television partners in the Big Ten, which there is right now with CBS, NBC, and Fox, I just find, and they all have their specific windows of noon, 3:30, and prime time. I have a hard time thinking we're ever going to get to a point until these contracts are redone down the road. And then maybe, because you see with the SEC on ESPN, they have a lot more ability to forecast what games they want to put where because they're the only ones that are making those decisions, right? There's not three networks trying to decide. So until the Big Ten would draw up a new television agreement that would include that, I don't think it's going to change, which I know fans don't want to hear because it's very frustrating to not know if your tailgate's going to start at 6 a.m. or noon or 2 p.m. Until maybe 6 days before kickoff. I can totally understand how frustrating that is, but I don't think that change, unfortunately, is on the horizon anytime soon.
Yeah, Broski wants to know which game do you think will be the whiteout game? I can't imagine it's not Oregon. Like I don't see any other option. No matter what time it is, it's got to be Oregon. You look at the schedule this year, and that's the game. There aren't any other games that really make sense.
That's where I'm at with it too, T. Frank. So obviously, Penn State in the past has had an issue, especially the last couple of years, with not getting its best home game in prime time, and therefore choosing a quote unquote lesser opponent to fill that whiteout game slot. This year, it's just really hard to look at the schedule, and so I think we can all agree it is very unlikely, if not impossible, that the Big Ten and Fox and its TV partners will. They're not going to make Oregon play a 9 a.m. Pacific time noon start at Beaver Stadium in a rematch of last year's Big Ten title game. There's just no chance of that. So does this game start at 3:30 or in prime time, I believe, is the big question left to answer. Penn State would then, if it's 3:30, would not necessarily get its full primetime whiteout effect, but it would get at least some of it. Certainly towards the end of September, we're starting to get darker sooner, not like we would in October and November, but sun's certainly
Nebraska
sooner,
would be the only other option. I mean, Indiana, if you're banking on them being good again, I think that's kind of a stretch, but Nebraska is the only other game with a name that kind of on the home schedule that makes any sense.
I think to the point you made just a second ago, when Penn State, there's no choice to me but Oregon. It's just a matter of what time it starts and who's televising it. But I can't fathom, no matter what time that starts, noon, 3:30 or 7:30. I just can't fathom Penn State picking any other game except for that one. To me, T. Frank, it just wouldn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I don't think Penn State wants to do anything different. They want to win that game against Oregon. And no matter what time of day, the whiteout provides a certain amount of extra energy. Yeah. I don't think there's any other option.
No, I don't either. So, like we said, we could get that information on Thursday when some kick times definitely come out for the first 3 weeks of the season. Time will tell. We'll have to just wait and see how things shake out. But we will have the latest for you at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I know you'll be live, T. Frank, with the guys for the recruiting show tomorrow. For those of you who are frequent listeners, both here on the channel and on the podcast, I don't know if we'll have that info for you guys to kick around, T. Frank, when you guys are live last year.
I don't care. We're saving it for Tuesday. We're not doing it on the Thursday show. There is a ton of recruiting information to go through. We're going to be saving that for next week.
I will give you the enjoyable task of keeping Ryan Snyder out of the TV conversation if it happens while he's live. But you guys can cross that bridge tomorrow.
That's a good point. Oh my gosh.
You guys can cross that bridge tomorrow. Yeah. I think you're going to be saved by the fact that this announcement is going to come in the afternoon, long after the show is off the air for the day. So I think you'll be in good shape. But this is the Wednesday version of the BWI Live Show. Brad asked, I'm going to get killed for this, but has Penn State ever considered going all white uniforms for the whiteout? No.
You're not going to kill for that. Yeah, they've talked about that.
Yeah, it's a very valid question, and people ask all the time. But no, the goal is for the white uniforms of the opponents to blend into the white clothing of the crowd and make it more difficult for them, not more difficult for Penn State. So, no.
Yeah, Penn State would like to do the white uniforms, but the opponent chooses
That's the other
what they're going to wear. Nobody's going to let that happen. Nobody's going to be like, you know what? Let's make this. Let's give them even more hype and more advantage and more vibes on a day like that. So that's James Franklin kind of outlined that a couple years ago when somebody asked me. He's like, yeah, there's a lot of things we'd like to do. You can't always do it because somebody else has a say. And that's kind of one of the hangups on that.
Yeah, and that goes back to even something that's not as prevalent or even existent anymore, but having to agree on a night game in after October was another one of those things where people would say, well, why don't they just play the Ohio State games at Beaver Stadium in such and such a year in November? Why don't they just play it at night? Well, why would Ohio State ever agree to such a thing? And Penn State vice versa if they were going to the Horseshoe. So, all these contracts have these little unwritten and or written rules in them that make things a little bit more difficult, T. Frank, than maybe they have to be.
Yeah, we're getting to a point where I thought that was a rule for like 5 years longer than it was. The whole night game thing, because that kind of just disappeared at one point. There was no like, hey, this doesn't happen. They just started scheduling night games and nobody said anything.
Yes, it went away supposedly in the new TV contract, but I think, as we can all imagine, some schools and conferences have more say over things than others when push comes to shove. So, at any rate, that's our TV conversation. Stay tuned to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for the latest on that. Like we said, definitely the first 3 games to the non-conference schedule comes out on Thursday, May 29th. What else comes out, we'll have to wait and see. You'll find out with us over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. T. Frank, it is the final May show, or at least for us on Wednesday. You got one more to go before the month is over. But in the lead into a new series I started at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com yesterday called Buy or Sell, the premise of it was there's just not a whole lot going on right now in the world of college football. There's some things going on. Obviously, we just talked about some of the news and notes, and recruiting is about to take off. But beyond that, things are pretty slow. Summer workouts have not yet started, but the summer semester academically is underway. And so it's a good time to kick around some topics that are maybe a little bit more, I don't know if lighthearted is the right word, but subjective, and, throw some opinions around, get your opinion, get mine, get those of the listeners, both in the chat and over at the Lions Den message board. And so it's buy or sell, simple concept. You either agree that the question posed, it will happen, or you don't. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We're going to start off with, let me find the graphic here. Will Penn State safety, Zachy Wheatley, lead Penn State in tackles? Penn State safeties have dominated the leaderboard when it comes to the most tackles over the last few years. It's not unanimous, but Jalen Reed, KJ Winston, Jair Brown, just some of the names who have led Penn State in that category. Zachy Wheatley, the top returning tackler for Penn State from last year's team, finishing behind Jalen Reed last year. Buy or sell, T. Frank, does Zachy Wheatley lead Penn State in tackles in 2025?
This is a tough one for me. We're going to be talking a little bit more about this, so I don't want to say all my thoughts here because it kind of bleeds into another conversation. Last year, so this is the whole thing about tackles too. You can wildly have a different account of tackles depending on where you go. So certain places will count half tackles. Certain places will chart tackles differently. I just go to PFF and count the tackles there. That's how I generally do tackles because that's where I go get most of my data anyway. So Kobe King and Jalen Reed tied with 74 tackles. Zachy Wheatley was third with 73 last year. So you got a 2/3 chance just based on last year's defense that it's going to be a safety. And I'm going to buy this one. I'm going to buy this one that he just edges out Tony Rojas as the tackle leader in 2025.
So I'm looking at the chat, and it's pretty much, I think you hit the nail on the head in that most people think it's going to be either Wheatley or Rojas. I bought on this one as well, but it's more about, to me, it's not a shot at Tony Rojas, and certainly has nothing to do with the conversation you and I had last week about the fact he missed plenty of tackles last year, but there was a reason for that because he played hurt, and the fact he played hurt is not appreciated enough in neither of our opinions by the fan base. Nothing to do with that. I just think I'm very bullish on Wheatley. I think he's in for an enormous season, T. Frank, and I think that's going to lead him to the top of the tackles board. But to your point, it depends. It is a bit of a screwy stat. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Ellis Brooks a few years ago, who had like 60 assisted tackles, which was part of the reason why he ended up with the team high in tackles. And I'm pretty sure PFF would not have agreed with that stat, but that was what was out there.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. It's the assisted, it's the half tackles, it's the jumped on pile. Some teams in some places, because there's no incentive if you're the official stat keeper for Penn State to not give a guy a tackle,
Right.
because stats are money. And I'm making a dumb comparison, right? But like, stats are currency. And so if you can say your guy had 104 tackles, that's awesome. If 30 of them were phantom half tackles, was he directly involved with bringing the player down? You can make an argument, but maybe not a strong one. Well, you're always going to lean towards the argument for if you're the official stat keeper for the team, as opposed to somebody else. And so tackles are one of those things that I find I don't necessarily even look at them when it comes to stats. Usually I'm looking at stops, tackles for loss, all those other things, maybe stop rate, things like that, as in terms of how average depth of tackle, some of the things that are more indicative of good productivity, not just my body was near the football, which is something that is, you can determine if you're the football player of playing hard and running the football. But if it's 4 yards down the field and the running back falls forward for 1.5 yards, like, how valuable is that half tackle as opposed to some of the other positive things you could do?
Well, based on that and based on the conversation you and Fitz had and with Nate yesterday, I'm going to guess, we'll go out of order here, but I'm going to guess you feel pretty similarly about sacks. But that is our next buy or sell topic here. Are you buying or selling, T. Frank, that Denai Dennis Sutton will have over 10 sacks during the 2025 season?
Yeah, so he had 8.5 last year. It helps that they've had a really long season, and a lot of those came in the postseason. So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say this is kind of me trying to rebrand my opinion on Denai Dennis Sutton, where I've been downplaying him a little bit this offseason, but he is the ace pass rusher here. Like, as much as we want to talk about Max Granville, and I'm very high on his potential and his future, Denai Dennis Sutton is a really good football player and a good pass rusher who, I guess the narrative in my head is he was leapfrogged by Abdul Carter in terms of performance, positional importance, all those things. As the guy who was there his whole career, and suddenly Abdul shows up in 1 year, takes over the position. So that kind of paints a certain picture, but it's his now, and he's a senior, and he plays a certain way that requires physical dominance and a brutality to the way he plays the game, which is power and strength and length and those things. So he's only gotten better at those things as he's gotten older, because he's the kind of guy that has steadily improved. So yeah, I'm going to say he crests that 10 sack threshold. I'll give him 10.5. How about that?
Okay. It's on a very steep limb there, T. Frank. Yeah, I saw this one on the rundown, and if you didn't have a graphic made, I was going to delete it because I just didn't have a strong opinion. We have Sean Fitz weighing in the chat. Sean says fewer than a sack per game over 17 games. There you go. Take that or leave it, T. Frank.
Yeah.
That's a fair point, Sean. Yeah, I will. I thought about this too long this morning. I'm going to sell. For some reason, I saw that number, and my first gut reaction was to sell on it. I don't necessarily know why, but it was.
Mine
so
too.
I'm going to go with it. Yeah. I don't have a strong opinion
that it would just be bad for us all to be selling.
Yes. So look, I look at it like this. To the point you made a minute ago about the other Penn State defensive ends, like, if you are an opposing offensive coordinator, we can get into this, I assume, a little bit with the Keystone conversation we're going to have here in a bit. But if you're an opposing coordinator, you're going to do everything in your power to keep Denai out of your backfield. And so does that open up some opportunities for some other guys to have more stats? It could, certainly. But will it limit his stats? His stats, yeah, I think so. Will that create others, stats for others? Yeah, I think so too. But, yeah, I just think that it might be a number that's a little too high. Although, to your point, if Penn State has another 16, 17 game season, it certainly becomes a lot easier to reach that goal compared to if you're just playing 13.
Yeah, and part of last season was the turnaround that I think the pass rush in general had, but also Denai Dennis Sutton had 2 sacks in the first 11 weeks of the season. And again, so PFF doesn't count half sacks. He had 2 sacks against Kent State and UCLA. Yep. Then he had the rest of his 7 sacks from Purdue onward, 2 against SMU, 1 against Maryland, 1 against Purdue, and 1 against Boise State. And then 2 against Notre Dame. So I'm just going to count everything here live on the show,
Sure.
which is good. Excellent radio and podcasting. But like that, this is tough because I don't want to feed into the Penn State didn't play anybody sort of narrative. But if you remember, Notre Dame was down to their 3rd left tackle, I want to say, in that game. Boise State's offensive line was not good. SMU's offensive line was not as good as they had been given credit for in the season. So he was injured in the middle of the year. And I think that is part of the narrative. So I want to see that improvement down the second half of the season. I want to see that translate, especially to the super soft first part of the schedule, right? And then like big plays in the biggest moments against Oregon. That has to be a part of the conversation, the narrative here of the buy or sell of, the impact of those sacks, not just did he rack up 10.
Right. No, it's a very fair point, T. Frank. That'll be a fun one to revisit, I think, during that week 4 bye week in September, because I think we're going to have a better feel. Make a note of that. We'll try and remember to revisit these during that bye week and see where we're at. There's a very high chance we both forget, but I don't know. Maybe we'll get lucky and remember. All right, let's go to the other side of the ball. Next up on our list of buy or sell topics, Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen. Are you buying or selling the Penn State senior running backs having a combined 2,500 rushing yards in 2025?
I want you to start with this one. I feel like you've got a better feel for this one than I do.
So last year, the duo combined over Penn State's obviously longer than normal season for 2,207 yards. So they're going to need about 300 more to get to 2,500. So the question I debated in my head going back and forth, getting ready for the show was, can they get both over 1,000 this year? Yes, certainly. But what does this offense look like without Tyler Warren? And I think that's where this conversation starts and ends, right? I think if you believe that those two are going to have Tyler Warren-esque years in terms of how impactful they are on the Penn State offense and how prominently featured they are in the Penn State offense, and I think your gut reaction would be that they're going to go over. Here's my concern, T. Frank. Those two hit that mark, at least somewhat in part because Quentin Martin and Corey Smith, Penn State had to be careful in terms of using those guys to not burn red shirts. They were trying to get to the end of the regular season with both of those guys, obviously still preserving their red shirt. That's not a concern this year. So if Penn State has some of the second half leads that we expect them to have, especially in September, like I think you can take some carries off of Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen often throughout the year to make sure both are ready to roll for the postseason. So I think that is going to lead to a little bit more diversity in terms of the final yards tally, and so I'm going to sell on this one. But it's not because they can't do it. It's because I think the way the schedule sets up and with the depth Penn State has, there's going to be too many mouths to feed and also too many opportunities to put two senior running backs on the sideline and get some wear and tear off of them.
Yeah, so the counterbalance of that in my mind, and I agree with everything you just said, is the goal for this group is to be more explosive and more deadly. I've talked about those kill shots, a 60-yard touchdown run versus a 40-yard run, where then you are in the red zone and it takes another 7 plays to get in the end zone. If Penn State can kill some drives early with touchdown plays, and that's the goal for Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen, is to take those runs that are big runs and make them backbreakers. So I kind of think about the 2017 team a lot in terms of what's the best we've seen from the Penn State offense in terms of explosiveness and effectiveness. And if you can win 66-10 in some of these games, and Nick Singleton maybe has 10 runs for 112 yards, or maybe it's even 14 runs for 175. You bank up some of those games, and suddenly this math is super easy for them if they play that long season. However, if they're that good, they're getting a bye in the playoff. Most likely, there's obviously terms and conditions apply to that hot take, but I think it's possible, but I'm going with you. I'm going to also sell on this one just because what you said makes too much sense of trying to get those young guys involved, take wear and tear off those seniors, and maybe their yardage is exactly the same as last year with fewer carries on those individuals, and the team overall rushes for more yards. Because don't forget, there is going to be a third running element from whomever is under quarterback. Sometimes that might be Kaytron Allen. Sometimes it might be Drew Aller. Who knows? Sometimes it might be Tyler Warren. Definitely not Tyler Warren anymore. Luke Reynolds or, a tight end or somebody else or Ethan Grunkemeyer. I don't know. Andy Kotelnicki's figuring all that stuff out.
Yeah, and we'll learn more about that throughout the remainder of the offseason. And then, of course, once preseason camp starts, we'll have you fully updated on what Penn State's planning to do on that side of the ball with Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, and the rest of the pieces Andy Kotelnicki have. Don't forget to sign up now. The offseason is continuing to roll along. We are busy with recruiting. Obviously, summer workout starts soon. It's just $1 for 1 week access and then billed annually from there at BWIillustrated.com. We have Sean in the chat here, at least for a little bit today, on the YouTube channel, but you can chat with him and the rest of the team every Friday at BWIillustrated.com, a premium intel heavy chat over in the Lions Den message board. So join us there. It's $1 for a week and then billed annually from there for premium insight and a subscription to BWIillustrated.com. T. Frank, is that it for buy or sell? I know we had a couple other topics. I think we're going to save the rest, or we got one more.
We had one more, just because I think it balances out the conversation. I think Wobble Wobble's a little salty in the chat here. He's makes sense because he wants them to get 2,500 yards no matter what. And I think both of us wonder if that's going to work out. Here's the part of the equation that I think is important for Penn State holistically. And so this is the last one here for today's show. Penn State wide receiver leads the team in receiving yards. A wide receiver leads the team in receiving yards. Do you want me to go first, or do you want to handle this one first?
Go for it, buddy. I never get in the way of you getting to talk about the receiver, so have at it.
I think it's important that it happens. And so I'm going to say bye, even though I don't know if I believe it. Just as a statement of importance, I want it to be known that I think it's important that Penn State has a receiver that is a legitimate threat. And again, this is not just me saying this. This is James Franklin saying this. This is Andy Kotelnicki sort of saying it when he talked about making sure there are enough targets in the offense, going to the right people at the right times, and making sure there's balance within the offense. Balance comes from threats. You cannot have a threat at receiver that is playing second fiddle to a tight end and not generating more yards. Maybe the tight end has more catches. But if the receiver doesn't have more yards, I think, again, you have this problem of balance within the offense, and you can shrink the field. Because all these great things that the running backs can do, doesn't matter if you can put 10 in the box. And if you can do that, it doesn't matter how many options you have, whether it's RPO or read option or triple option or super duper fake or the shiny object plays from the bowl games. They don't work as well if you don't have threats everywhere. And so Penn State needs to have a receiver that leads the team in receiving yards. I don't know who it is. Right. And so that's obviously the problem. So I'm going to say bye in the loosest possible terms, where I'm ready to sell that within the first week of the season if things aren't going well.
Well, look, if Penn State does not have a receiver that does well against that tremendously challenging non-conference schedule, then there'll be bigger issues during that bye week than whether you and I can remember to revisit this conversation. I'm going to buy for sure. I think that Penn State will, and James Franklin will, ensure that a receiver leads Penn State in receiving yards in 2025. I just don't see any way around the fact of that being the case. Now, again, to your point, who is it? Is it Trevor Pena? Is it Devontae Ross? Is it Kyron Hudson? We'll have to just wait and see if it's one of those guys, if it's Liam Clifford, if it's Tyser Denmark, if it's Cade Saunders, on and on and on. I have no interest in picking which guy is the leader at the moment. But, T-Frank, I think we're pretty much both in agreement that it will end up being a receiver, not a tight end, not a running back, that leads Penn State in receiving yards in 2025. Yeah.
So I want to get this particular, and we can get back to this later. But I want to know why. So Wobble Wobble says Nick and tight ends catching all them balls, and I understand generally, but I want to know why you want that. I've tried to explain why that's not a good thing. And I just want to know why you want that. There is this general conversation on the message board here on the show, in the comments, where it's 100% give everything to the running backs and tight ends. And we saw what happened when you did that last year, and it got you the results you got. I don't know why you still want that. Right. It's just going to be better this year. I guess I don't. I'm trying to understand. We can get back to it later because we got to get on to the rest of the show. But I just find this particular thread of Penn State fans wanting Nick Singleton and Katron Allen to get all the, remember, stats are currency, all the sexy stats for just 2 or 3 players. It may feel good, but I think that's a dangerous place to be from an offensive perspective.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I think that's why you and I are both on the buy side of this conversation when it comes to the receivers actually leading Penn State in receiving. It's amazing that you can even ask and answer that question in 2025, but it's, well, here we are.
It feels like you don't like part of your own team in certain aspects if you're a Penn State fan. Like, you actively are rooting against the receivers, which to have them not be a part of the offense seems crazy to me.
Yes,
sorry.
But
I know I keep doubling down on this conversation. We need to move on.
Yeah, it's okay. I told you I do not get in the way of you talking receivers ever, so I will not do that here, and I'll let the chat kind of run the show from there. But all right, it is the Wednesday, May 28th version of BWI Live. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. Let's get into the Keystone. You had this conversation over on the Lions Den message board over the weekend. The Keystone Players that Penn State cannot do without in 2025. We're going to start with today's show on defense. And so, obviously, Jim Knowles is the new defensive coordinator for Penn State, comes in after helping lead Ohio State to a national championship. And one of the things he made clear from the outset, T. Frank, is that he was going to blend what he does best with what already exists at Penn State and what's already been successful at Penn State. Some of that, of course, is the players that are on the roster.
Yeah, and so so I want to start with that particular conversation. It's funny because we had the same conversation about Manny Diaz, I want to say, in terms of like, oh, there's not that much change, and there's, very similar, and it was very different from Brent Pry. Like, you had certain aspects of, yes, they play 4 down defensive linemen, and they generally play 2 linebackers. Other than that, it was just a really different defense. And I think maybe it's not right away. Maybe Jim Knowles is being honest about that. And there are some similarities and there are some architectural things. Or they wanted to go to 3 safeties last year. But this is a very different defense than the pressure style defense that Manny Diaz left behind that Tom Allen facsimiled last year under his own style. This is going to be different. And so I think that there is a conversation about whether or not how different it is. And to me, like, I guess that leads me to the players that are most important to Jim Knowles and to making this system work.
Okay, so we did not do enough prep work here, so I have no idea which order you want to go in. So why don't you press the first button, then I'll figure it out from there. Who are we going to start this conversation with? It's
got to be Zakee Wheatley. And that's kind of that was my preamble. I should have just led into. I think he's the most important player on the defense to make this particular scheme work based on what they did in the spring game, what I saw them do at Ohio State, and kind of the direction of the defense where I think they're going. Now, caveats to this, obviously, it is a spring game where they are practicing a particular defense, most likely. They're playing a very base defense. They're not doing a lot of extravagant things, although I saw like blitzes and stuff that I wouldn't see if it was on TV. So I think we got a little bit more insight into what's going on. And just the safety position, that Caleb Downs role, that's Zakee Wheatley's job. And I guess the point of the Keystone Players is not necessarily who's the best. It's not who's going to be the best player on the defense, who's the most talented. It's if you lose this player, if you pull the Keystone out, does the whole arch fall over? If you don't have Zakee Wheatley, I wonder if you have to change the defensive game plan. And I think that's why he's important, not necessarily. I'm trying to make it not just if you're injured, if this player's injured, Penn State's in trouble. Because, you could have Tony Rojas isn't on the list. Spoiler alert. I think, the linebackers, they could muddle their way through. It wouldn't be pretty, but they might be able to muddle their way through if one of the key linebackers like Dom DeLuca or Tony Rojas goes down for a period of time. I don't know what happens if Zakee Wheatley gets injured, because that means they're moving somebody important into that role from one of the other starting positions, because I don't think it's going to be the guys behind him on the depth chart that are stepping into that role. And now you're asking, does sophomore Dejon Lane have the football experience to be the guy you're building the defense around? And I just have questions about that. I don't know that that's necessarily what they would do in that particular context.
Would you buy or sell Wheatley being a bigger loss to this Penn State defense if he would go down than KJ Winston was to the 2024 defense, or is it about the same?
I think it's bigger, because part of this is in retrospect. We saw that team evolve, But that's kind of the point, is they had to change what they wanted to do last year. They had to move Jalen Reed back to that boundary safety position, to the KJ Winston role, and then they had to put in a nickel corner, which made a vastly different defense, which is a very different defense, I think, in style, what they wanted to do, the blitzing, the run defense, than if you had Jalen Reed down there, who's 6 foot, 205 pounds, as opposed to 178-pound nickel corner. And I think they were more hesitant to do some of the stuff you're going to see this year from the Penn State defense than you were last year. So I don't know. I guess they just go back to the same plan, but I've never seen Jim Knowles' defense run exceptionally well when it didn't have 3 safeties on the field, executing safety roles. So I don't think there's as much of we're just going to pivot to something else. That could happen, and then it's not what you signed up for. I don't think it's what you signed up for, that innovative style that's going to produce better results based on what you have. In the long run, sometimes creativity and evolution takes the failure of it not working and trying to find your way through to the next positive thing. It doesn't just happen overnight. You have to figure out what the problem is, how to fix it, and then how to be creative in the new environment. That takes time. And so, Wheatley's very important this year, in my opinion.
All right. Who's up next?
For a similar conversation, Zane Durant. At the position I expect him to play and the way I expect the defense to play up front, I just think that beyond the depth issues and beyond the conversation about, who's going to be healthy, Zane Durant and what he can do up front, I don't think there's anyone that can replicate it. There's no facsimile of Zane Durant on the defensive roster right now. This is where in the article I mentioned, you got to make some hard choices. Not everybody can be a keystone player. That's the point. It's one point. So between Zane Durant and Dennis Sutton, our conversation earlier about Nittany and his abilities and his production this upcoming year, you can blitz to get sacks. You can blitz to get pressure. I don't know that you can have the run defense abilities and what you want from Zane Durant as a pass rusher this year in any other context. You can't just throw bodies at it and still maintain this defense. So that particular position and Zane Durant's impact on the run defense in particular, talked about this yesterday. I think people associate him with a certain style. He's much better against double teams than a lot of people would expect. And that doesn't mean he's perfect. It doesn't mean he doesn't lose. It doesn't mean he's the best you've ever seen. But for a guy who's 289, 88 pounds, he's really good at holding against double teams and not outright getting blown off the ball. On top of his elusiveness and his athletic explosiveness to get from gap to gap and basically look like he's teleporting on film. So I don't know anybody that can do his job and do his job to the level that Zane Durant can on this particular team at a position that's really important to this defense. That I'm expecting him to maybe play more 3 technique if we see what we saw in the past. That's really important in any defense, let alone this one, which is, again, trying to stop the run with 6 players in the box. And you've got to have some guys making plays above and beyond, or just making sure they're always right in order to do that correctly. And Zane Durant is a senior. He's got to be the guy up front.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Certainly a guy I think from a national or even regional perspective is going to be overlooked in terms of preseason accolades and things like that, but I think Penn State, certainly its fans, know how important he is and how big a successful year would be for him and for this defense, and how crucial it'll be to this 2025 Penn State football team. Just too many. What's the right way? You guys had this conversation yesterday, but didn't get the accolades that he probably should have got last year, because the counting stats, the ones that we talked about earlier, the tackles and the sacks and the things you see if you load up Go Penn State's sports website, or if you load up ESPN. But he was much more impactful and created a lot for his teammates that do not end up on the stat sheet. So we'll see. Yeah. Obviously, he'll continue to do that this year, and that will lead to success both for him and for his teammates as well. So certainly a guy. Yeah, go ahead, T. Frank. I was going to say, certainly a guy you can't lose. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and so I think that there's one of his biggest issues was he missed about 20% of his tackles last year, which is a really high number. But there's a difference between missing 20% of your tackles and having half of those be in the backfield 2 or 3 yards in the backfield, where now your teammates are rallying to get the tackle. And yes, maybe you missed that one, but you ruined that play for the offense. Now, what they had intended to do is over, and now they've got to improvise. And sometimes that works out, and then sometimes it absolutely does not. And Zane Durant providing that opportunity for the defense to create that havoc, they're not going to be as aggressive at attacking downhill and filling gaps on the other side. So you still need to have a bit of that in the defense, and that's going to come from Durant, winning his block, getting into the hole, and forcing the offense to bounce the ball and not run in between the tackles. And, I think that's one of those things where it's the hidden part of the game where even sometimes I think the advanced stats don't have the full picture of how impactful Zane Durant was as a run defender.
All right, let's go back to the secondary for your last Keystone player on defense. It's cornerback A.J. Harris.
So there are certain things that people say and they just stick in your brain. Last year, James Franklin talked about 65 plays during the playoffs and wanted to be aggressive, wanted them to coach aggressive, play aggressive. And then you imply all of that on the play on the field, good and bad. Terry Smith said that A.J. Harris is everything they'd hoped, and he is an All-American candidate this year at corner, which is really hard to do. A.J. Harris was good last year. He was not All-American good. We all saw, the missed jam on, I think it was Kyron Hudson for a touchdown in the USC game. There were some opportunities that he missed in that sense. All-American is interceptions and, highlight plays and no negative plays necessarily. So he's going to get the stats. And I think, again, that plays into the defensive game plan where you're going to see some press coverage. But last year, Penn State's defense was insane with the number of pressure plays they had where they had press coverage. Even if it was a zone, they started out in press coverage with the corners nose to nose on the line of scrimmage with the receivers. Yep. If you give A.J. Harris a couple more plays where he can just read and attack, I think that's possible. And so, there is a conversation about replicating the skill within the system. And do you have 3 corners? And if you lost A.J. Harris, could you still get by? Yes. But if you're pulling out somebody they think is going to be that elite, and if A.J. Harris is an All-American candidate, he is a first-round corner. This is a guy who's going to go in the first round of the NFL draft. There are no reasons for him not to, other than, I think, a bit of helmet scouting by the NFL. If that's the case, and I trust Terry Smith and his assessment of how good A.J. Harris is, I don't know how he's not the most important player at corner in a system that relies on coverage and on a team that we're not really sure about their pass rush right now. We don't know, where is all of the pass rush going to come from? Are they going to be able to generate it the same level they were last year on the buy or sell, or better or worse? Excuse me. We're playing too many games. Not too many. I love it. On better or worse, everyone yesterday picked slightly worse from the pass rush. It makes sense. So you want to have lights out coverage, and that starts with a guy who might be an All-American candidate.
Yeah, I think that he's in for a big season, and you're starting to see his name pop up in some of these way too early 2026 mock drafts, which does not mean a lot based on if you go back and look at some of the ones from last year. Certainly not every player on those made the cut, but the fact he's even being mentioned, I think, is another indicator of what lies ahead for him potentially this year in another season at Penn State under the direction of Terry Smith, who, of course, continues to pump out cornerbacks at a pretty impressive rate as he gets ready for his latest season in State College. T. Frank, final thoughts there before we get to the mailbag?
No, I do, again, I've spent the last couple of days being like, Nittany Sutton is really important, and he's a really good football player, and then he's not a Keystone player. So there's no way to be right here. I picked a situation where I had to lose no matter what, because I also think Tony Rojas is really important. But I think, I'm reasonably confident that I didn't want to go more than 3. Those are my 3 players. And that's the question for you, our question of the day, whether you're here live in the chat. We got people that are replying as we're going live. But if you're watching on replay, reply to the video. Who are the indispensable players? Who are the Keystone players on the Penn State defense for 2025? Let us know in the comments, and we'll reply to you. And, give us your thoughts. We'll give us our thoughts to you. And I don't know what I was trying to say there. So, yeah, just that's our question of the day.
All right. Well, I think we're going to lose our entire viewing audience because Sean Fitz is going to put a new on-3 recruiting prediction machine pick in for Penn State over at BWIillustrated.com.
It's a better tease than we've had all show.
It certainly is, yes. So please join us over at BWIillustrated.com. Don't forget, it's $1 for the first week and then billed annually from there. So you'll find out who Sean is putting a prediction in for Penn State to land. Certainly that'll get the chat going here on a rainy Wednesday. But while you wait to find out who that is, it's time for us to get to the Wednesday, May 28th edition of the BWI Live Mailbag, which if I could use my mouse here, I'd press the button and we'd get there even sooner, but let's do it. All right, so the mailbag is open. Let me look at the order of questions here. All right, we're going to go to Steve Franks first. His question is, in your opinion, who might be the most slept-on player on either side of the ball that when we look back at this time next year, we say, I knew he was good, but I didn't think he'd be as good as he was, is the question from Steve Franks. Steve, thanks for your question. T. Frank, I'll let you lead off here. Do you have an initial thought?
I'm going to say Xavier Gilliam.
Okay.
I was really impressed with him.
I shouldn't have let you lead off. That was a really poor hosting error by me.
Well, I can't say, I can't say Khalil Dinkins after the whole conversation about the wide receivers earlier in the show. So I'm going to go with Xavier Gilliam because I think, you're always looking for, the way I try to view football players generally is from a physical perspective. Do they have anything that's going to prevent them from being a complete player at their position? And from what I've seen from Xavier Gilliam, I don't see anything that prevents him from being an elite football player. And then when you put in the context clues of he's already separated himself from the pack of young defenders. He was ahead of guys that were older than him last year, including Ty Blanding, as a freshman in terms of first guys on the field. He was with Blanding, but really the guy we were talking about was Gilliam. And then watching him in person, he moved and did things from an explosively violent way that are indicative of a guy who can be an elite defensive tackle, doing it every single play, doing it against the best competition is obviously a new threshold. But the indicators there early are that this guy can be the next Zane Durant. And I mean that because you look at Zane Durant's career path, he was starting during his sophomore season. Right now, Gilliam is slated to be starting his sophomore season.
Right.
So we're on that path. And I know he didn't come in with the same fanfare in recruiting as Durant. They're different players. Zane Durant, I think, could play fullback. I don't know that Gilliam can do that, but he might be more of a traditional defensive tackle. And so I guess the part for me is I think he has the opportunity to be a great pass rusher. And it's just going to be how long it takes him to learn the position at a high level. But we've seen early indications that he gets it. And I think that that's a really good sign for Penn State.
Yeah, like I said, all the reasons you just outlined are why I should have went first and taken Xavier Gilliam and let you sit here and ponder who you could pick to answer Steve's question, which again was who might be the most slept-on player that we'll look back on and say, we knew he'd be good, but not that good. So you went defense. I'm going to go to the other side of the ball, and I'll just get everybody wound up. I think that there's two names that come to mind to me on that side of the ball. I think we're forgetting about Andrew Rapplier because he missed all of the season. And I just am a little bullish on what he could have been last year before he got hurt. And I think that this could be a year that he reminds us just how highly coveted and how highly coveted he was and the high expectations that we had for him last year before he got hurt. So he's one that comes to mind as someone who maybe isn't being talked about much on May 28th, but could be talked about a lot more on September 28th after that Oregon game. And the other one that comes to mind is Tysier Denmark. Again, I just think it's all the more we hear, I think there's so much expectation for him, but there's not any proof in the pudding, right? So we need to see that. But if there is, if he can do things consistently well, I think that obviously he will be a big part of this offense. So he's another one that I think that we may look back on at this time of the year next year and say, we thought he could put it all together. but maybe the way he put it all together was much better than what we thought it could be. So
Yeah.
those are the two that come to mind to me.
Can we jump into the chat here? There's a good one here from M.
Yeah.
Prez. He says, K-Mac or Dejan Lane, who gets more playing time this year, do you think? I'm going to go with Dejan Lane because I think King-Mac, even though I think it's best if he is the guy that wins that nickel competition, that is a position where, depending on the opponent, if you have more 3-receiver sets and they are playing more spread football with a pass-heavy centric kind of offense, you'd probably want Zion Tracy out there more often than King Mac. So I just think even the nickel's always a position that splits reps. Ohio State did not do that, but Penn State is a program built on making sure development happens and getting guys involved. It's not about like the top 11 mercenaries. And I mean that in a respectful way of like, they are professional. Like they run like an NFL defense in a lot of ways, watching them from their substitution patterns. Dejan Lane is going to be on the field because I don't know that Vabu Torre is going to be pushing him for snaps this year. So that would be my answer to M. Prez. You want to go to where do we go next?
Sure. Let's see here. It comes from a Paul Puslesny fan. I got to find the right button here. Here we go. I think this is the right one.
We clicked it at the same time.
Yes, we certainly did. All right. So the question here is Zariah Fisher better or worse than Jesse Luketa in his prime at defensive end?
I think better. I always felt like Jesse Luketa was a tough fit at D end. I don't know that he had the full skill set of a defensive end where he had the body for it, but I don't know that he maybe had the instincts or he had the bend to get to the quarterback to be like a complete player. Luketa was great as a kind of a hybrid edge player that could play the run, could do some things, but I don't remember him being an impactful pass rusher. I think Fisher looks a little more fluid, a little more natural at the position in a couple of reps I've seen from him, both before he got injured last year and during the blue-white game. I see a little bit more like actual defensive end as opposed to a hybrid player that's just 266 or whatever Luketa was. I don't know that Fisher has the physical abilities of Luketa, which were wild and kind of underrated. And then, but I do think he could be a better player at the position. I've seen him do better things, just instinctively and from a positional fundamentals perspective of defending the run at defensive end. So I'm going to go with he's better than that in a production standpoint.
We now get to the full T. Frank portion of the show with our next question. What should Penn State fans' expectations be for Tony Ross this season? That question comes from Brady Smith on Twitter. T. Frank, take it away, buddy.
I don't know if I expect him to lead the team in tackles for loss or be a superstar the way that I think impact plays kind of come through in the run. This defense does not ask its linebackers to be the stars of the show. They are playing a part in the front seven. And going back to the conversation about the safeties and Zakee Wheatley leading the team in tackles, I expect that because I think it's going to be designed for that to happen. That being said, if you win your gap and you are the guy to be able to make the tackle in the backfield, they're going to do that. They're just not going to sell out to get tackles for loss and create risk on the backside. At least that's what I've seen. If they incorporate those pressure things from previous, that's something I can't anticipate from the blend of what we haven't seen. The main thing is I expect fewer missed tackles. I think that's just a major part of last year. The injury was a major part of the missed tackle problem, and I expect that to improve. I don't know if he's going to be the best tackler we've ever seen. He may still be a guy that likes to go for the big hit instead of tackling and wrapping up, but Jim Knowles seems like a guy who's very intent on tackling fundamentals. And Tony Rojas is a really smart football player who understands how to play the position despite what happened last year. So I expect him to be better as a tackler and to be top 2 in tackles on the team.
All right. Think this is the last one we have. It comes from Mike. Mike asked, which games outside, I turned it off. Which games outside of the Oregon and Ohio State games do you see as the biggest regular season threats to Penn State? So my initial thought, T. Frank, is none of them. But I'm curious if you have any concerns, because I do have a case I can make for at least one of them.
Yeah, I'm going to go with now I want to pick the one you're not going to pick. So I'm going to go. Why don't you go make your case, and then I'll make a case for the other one.
So I think the home run pick is Iowa because crazy things just seem to happen at Kinnick Stadium when Penn State's involved or when anyone's involved. I mean, Iowa has beat a lot of teams out there. It really had no business beating, and to me, it doesn't really have any business beating this Penn State team this year. But I think that's the one that Penn State fans are going to circle, fairly or not, realistically or not, because of past history with Kinnick. So that's the one that jumps off the board to me here.
I'm going to go with Nebraska. I don't know enough about them yet. To start the show, who was it? It was Ryan. Ryan said he wanted a preview series on some of the top opponents for the upcoming season. So like we're absolutely going to do that in July, but I haven't gotten to all of that yet. Z-Man says Indiana ? And I just don't know that you can bank on Indiana reloading. And I don't know enough about Nebraska, but I do know they have a returning quarterback, and I'm going to be national media pundit in here and say if you got a returning quarterback that gives you a leg up, they're also willing to spend a lot of money, and they're willing to go aggressive in the portal. And, I don't think Matt Rule's a bad coach. So there's the opportunity for that to be a game. It's at home, so I don't necessarily think of it as a problem for them. I don't expect them to be, not favored in that game. I tried to make that a non-double negative sentence. Sorry about that. But I expect them to be favored. I expect them to be able to win, but that might be one where down the line we learn, Nebraska's better this year. And this is finally the year, Greg, finally the year that Nebraska returns to glory. It's not impossible. And so I think that there's just, more to learn, but that'd be the other team I'd highlight. Last thing here is there's one I added late that's not on the rundown. Poncho 570 asks, I think, an important question for the year. How often do you see the younger defenders being given responsibility to make calls and adjust alignments in the first 3 weeks of the season to help their learning curve, especially in the back seven? So essentially he's asking, not only are they getting reps, but are the middle linebacker and the safeties getting reps for some of those young players to talk about, what we just talked about with Zakee Wheatley being irreplaceable in this defense. I want to see that. I want to see how often the defense in particular, who's coming in at those critical positions that we need to know how they're going to play to take snaps off of whoever is the starting linebacker, whoever's got the green dot, who's got the second green dot. And then in the safety room, what is the actual rotation? I know what the two deep looks like right now based on what we saw in the spring, but what's the actual, contingency plan B for what happens in the, bad stuff happens? What's the actual contingency plan? So I think that's important to understand in the first 3 weeks, not just are these young guys getting reps, but who's playing where. And I think that's going to be something they're going to focus on. I absolutely believe at linebacker, they're going to do a lot of different combinations, and they're going to give guys like Anthony Specca an opportunity to come in during the competitive portion of the game and run the defense, because they got to find those things out, let them make mistakes, and then grow from that. And if they're running the first team into the third quarter with no substitutions, you've got a problem. Like, that's not good for this defense.
Christian, one thing from the chat, he says UCLA with Nico a week after Oregon is a sneaky trap for Penn State. I have a thought on that. I'm going to actually turn that into a story over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com later today. So check that out. I'll answer that there. I actually did have a thought about that. Meant to write something about that as a buy or sell previously. Never got around to it, but now I have a good reason to. So check that out over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Don't forget, too, Sean Fitz promised a new on-3 recruiting prediction machine pick at Blue White Illustrated, so be sure to go check that out. And don't forget, as Kevin thankfully reminds us, and we'll remind you, like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave us a review wherever you get your podcast if you're listening to the audio version. And thanks for being here. As always, Steve Frank, any final thoughts?
Let's get to it. Let's write some stuff, talk about some stuff. We'll be back tomorrow with the recruiting show. Obviously, we're going to be talking about what Fitz just said in the chat, but also there's plenty of other information.
You guys have a jam-packed show tomorrow. You and I weren't sure how we were going to get an hour out of this show. I don't know how you're going to contain that show to an hour.
It won't. That's how.
All right. Well, that's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. You've been listening to BWI Live on May 28th. Like he said, the guys are back tomorrow with the recruiting show. We'll be back next week, and we can find you all the time at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Have a good day.